Yeah, you're so rude. Hey, Shane, why you dressed like pirate?
Oh, is it streaming?
Oh,
Come lah, cyberbully Shane in front of so many people. Don't know how many people. Sarah, say something.
And then wait a couple.
I don't think it's duplicated, right?
No, you have to wait a couple seconds. Sarah, do you go back to your OBS? Are you capturing your mic audio? Because your mic audio is not captured through your desktop audio. You have to set up an extra input thing, and you have to click mic audio in your input. Oh, so you don't want it. You don't want it to pick up your voice.
Oh, it worked. We can't hear you in the stream. I heard my voice and then I didn't hear you talk after that.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll just use the chat. We'll just use the chat to communicate. Yeah, you can play the audio, but we'll also shut up and use it. We use the chat to communicate. You just tell us when you want us to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. Everyone having a good Sunday? I'd like to thank you all for coming to MISI Solidarity's first Amateur Activism workshop. Yes, there will be more. And we know how important Sunday afternoons are to people. Like, you guys could be watching a movie, hanging out with family. Instead, y'all are here to join us. And thank y'all so much for coming to tune in. With that, I'd like to extend the warmest welcome to all our guests and viewers today. And I guess with that said, y'all are in for a long one. It's 3 hours long. And then you'll have a night forum as well if you want to attend that. So grab a snack, kick back, and enjoy the materials. Without further ado, I'd like to cede the floor to Pravin to begin with our first segment. Pravin?
Thanks, Victor. Welcome everyone. Thanks for making time again today. So, like we mentioned, we are the Amateur Activism Workshop, and today the first session is gonna be about root cause, right? So, understanding root cause of we see a lot of social issues in our society today, and one of the things that we wanted to highlight in this workshop is how do we understand what are the root causes that is telling us a reason for these social issues that we see, right? Now, by the end of this workshop, the expectation is that we'll be able to look into these social problems a bit more in depth, right? We'll be able to analyze this a bit more in detail, right? The next will be understanding these root causes and why is it happening, right? We need to understand those things as well. And finally, for us to take actions in terms of finding a resolution for any of the social issues that we see, we need to be able to understand the root cause. Only then we can make effective decisions in finding resolutions, right? So what are root causes, right? Why is it important that we need to identify these items? Now, when it comes to root causes, identifying genuine solutions to a problem is the key reason why we need to understand root causes, right? Because if we try to resolve any issues that we have in society without understanding what is the reason, we may just spend a lot of effort that is going to waste, right? So I'll just quote one easy example that we've seen quite recently, right? So we are in the middle of a pandemic, and one of the Malaysian government had created the stimulus package, right? So it was about 260 billion ringgit, and it was issued out last year, right? But the thing is, the focus of this stimulus package was to target vulnerable communities, right? Women and informal workers, right? But then out of this amount, only 10% was direct fiscal injection into the economy. 40% was more in the form of loan moratorium, and 16% was in the form of withdrawals from the employee provident fund, right? So a lot of the target communities supposedly did not actually benefit from this stimulus at all, because, like, for example, people who work in the informal economy with no existing access to credit, right? So they were not getting the benefits of this stimulus package at all, which takes me to my next point, the fact that we need to consider who's the beneficiary, who's the most impacted group of people of a particular problem for us to come up with a resolution. Because if we don't consider them, it's almost as if there's no point in taking any effort in resolving any social issue, right? So that's the main reason we need to understand why root causes are important. Now, today we'll be talking about three main root causes that stands as the key reasons for a lot of issues in our society, and we want to bring that to the audience today, right? So there's patriarchy, capitalism, and xenophobia and racism. So I'd like to invite my friend Shana to start us off with patriarchy.
Hi everyone, I'm Shana, and today I will be talking about patriarchy. So if you aren't familiar with patriarchy, let me give you a quick rundown on what it means. Patriarchy is something we can already observe from years and years ago. It refers to a society dominated by where men, society, state, and economy are categorized by institutionalized, pervasive gender oppression. What this basically means is that it promotes a male privilege in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from any form of authority. So next, society expects girls to be agreeable, nice, have good manners, be gentle and dainty. They are even expected to be able to cook and learn how to sew at a young age. On the other hand, boys are expected to be confident, muscular, and even possess leadership skill, be bold and athletic. As you can see here, girls are expected to have a soft persona, whereas boys are expected to exude a rough persona. So you can see right off the bat, we can observe a power dynamic between the gender roles. The softer, submissive, weaker girl and the stronger, dominant, rougher boy. So in this next slide, I want to point out that femininity is often associated with being weak and dependent, whereas masculinity is often associated with being strong and independent. Men who are perceived as feminine will often get bullied or shamed because they do not fit the traditional standard of a man. If a man is perceived as gentle, sensitive, and emotional, they will be called girly. They will even be called slurs, including the P word. On the contrary, women who act manly, dress differently compared to most women, will be labeled as tomboy for being rough, such as dressing more boyish with pants which allow rougher movements or carrying herself more assertively. However, men who are more feminine will more likely be bashed and shunned. They are more likely to be boycotted by their peers, bullied in school, and they will most likely be seen as outcasts. This disparity in treatment is reflective of the fact that even regardless of gender, masculine traits will always be more favored than feminine traits. In this next slide, we will be talking about the ideology of patriarchy and how it manifests in a socio-sexual, socio-economic, and legislative context. According to patriarchy, a woman's worth is defined not by her true nature, but as a man defines her. So what does this mean? We will be analyzing this by dissecting the concept of wife material, a term I am sure we are all familiar with. So, the ideal of a wife. She is expected to cook, clean, take care of the house, children, and the husband. In other words, under patriarchy, a woman's worth is defined by how well she can take care of her husband and her family. This manifests as a role of a baby making machine, a cook, a cleaner, and even a nanny. She may never live her life revolving around herself. The patriarchal system frowns upon working women. She is shamed for choosing a career over family. I remember how my father's side of the family had to convince my mom to be a stay-at-home mom and a housewife instead of pursuing her career, just because she had kids, okay? Because she had kids. So till this day, she regrets giving in to the standards of being a mom. And you can see clearly this is how patriarchy can affect one's life, a woman's life in particular. Other than that, someone who is wife material is expected to save her own body for her future husband. This ties into the gender glorification of virginity, perpetrated mostly by parents. Daughters are expected to keep their V card, and their family would often freak out if she loses it. But on the other hand, if a man loses his virginity, some families would be indifferent about it, saying it's a norm for a man to relieve their needs as they are more generally horny than women because, hormones, which, by the way, I think is a lousy excuse. So anyway, they might be advised since young that it is fine to engage in sexual intercourse as long as it's safe. A girl is considered clean if she's a virgin and impure or used if she is not. In stark contrast, the higher a man's body count, the more praise he will receive. So, the patriarchal construct of the virgin wife places the ownership of a woman's body not with herself, but with her husband. Under patriarchy, a woman's body served only to satiate the need of a man, not her own. So next, wife material is also someone who covers up, someone who dresses conservatively. Do you all remember during the first week of the pandemic, the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development released a poster, as you can see in my slide there, with some tips for moms who work from home. If you don't remember, I'll give you a quick recap. They advise mothers to avoid wearing home clothing, which are shabby, keep their makeup routine, and to dress properly, like modestly, okay, at home. And they are also advised women to not nag at their husband and to speak like Doraemon to avoid any arguments for the sake of rumah tangga bahagia. Like, hello, excuse me. Like, they basically see women as some sort of entertainment for their husband. Like, come on, this is our government, right? So besides setting expectations for how a woman has to look and carry herself, wife material means women who dress provocatively are seen as lesser and unworthy. The patriarchal system restricts the way women dress so that they can control women's sexuality. This culture of policing how women dress and shaming them for dressing promiscuously is part and parcel of slut-shaming culture. With that being said, I would like to move on to my next slide, which talks about slut-shaming. So, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think about sluts? Generally, sluts refers to women who like to have sexual intercourse with anyone without any benefit or emotional involvement. Whenever the word slut is mentioned, we don't automatically think of men. Instead, we think of women who dress provocatively. So, sure, there are also sexual terms for men who sleep around a lot, like man whore, but this doesn't seem to bother them. As a matter of fact, they are proud of it because it indicates a larger body count. The morning, usually after the morning after a sexual encounter, a woman's journey home is called the walk of shame, whereas a man's journey home is called the walk of pride. So you can see that the double standard is extremely real and it's grounded deeply in active oppression against a woman's ability to belong to herself. The core of slut shaming lies in a patriarchal ideology that disallows women from taking pride and agency over her body and sexuality. Okay, a little trigger warning here. I will be talking a little bit about rape, so feel free to tune out if you're uncomfortable or anything. So next, I would like to bring up the subject that slut shaming, aka bullying women for sexual expression. It is the foundation, slut shaming is the foundation of victim blaming, and it contributes to rape culture by normalizing the idea that a woman's sexual expression is an invitation for rape or assault. So let's talk about this. You know how a woman's sexual history or appearance would often be a question if she reports any sexual assault? Yeah, that. Society would often blame women instead of the perpetrators. Like you can see in this slide they would say something like, if she didn't want to get raped, she should have worn something less provocative. Or if she didn't want to get raped, she didn't want to get touched, she shouldn't have flirted so much. This is exactly why women are afraid to come forward with their stories and they're reluctant to report it. It's because of victim blaming. Victim blaming uses a woman's promiscuity to undermine her credibility, shifting the blame to women who are for being assaulted. It perpetrates the ideology that a woman has to control herself if she doesn't want to be harmed, raped. She is used as Rape is generally used as a threat in order to maintain the status quo. In addition, slut shaming is too the foundation of the stigma surrounding prostitutes and sex workers. Women who participate in pornography will often be judged and looked down upon by the society with the argument that they do not respect their body. The thing about patriarchy is that men love looking at women's body. They love leak nudes, they love porn. Just last year, 4 women's photo and videos were shared without their consent via Telegram group. And this happened in Malaysia, okay, people? When I shared this news to my male friends, they weren't surprised. But to my surprise, apparently there's plenty more of similar groups that share such thing, even child pornography, which is bizarre and totally wrong in many ways. My point is that if a woman decides to love her own body, to wear something risque, or show some skin, to take control over her own body by opening an OnlyFans, for example, she will be labeled a slut. She is shamed, ridiculed, and bashed. Thus, under patriarchy, a woman's body is desired and deeply enjoyed, but that desire and joy can never be felt by the woman herself. If she ever tries to reclaim her own body, to liberate herself sexually, she will be shamed. A woman can never love her body for herself. She can only love her body in terms of how a man does. So, all these ideology are echoed in our legislation. The current Malaysian law explicitly allows husband to rape their wife. According to the exception under Section 375, sexual intercourse by a man with his own wife by a marriage which is valid under any written law for the time being in force or is recognized in Malaysia as valid is not rape. The wife material attitude reduces women to be a husband's property, an object. It pushes that to be wife material, you may not practice individuality. You are good for nothing but to be a sex machine and a birth giver. This is why marital rape is not recognized because it is not even being seen as rape in the first place. My next point being the criminalization of prostitution. According to Section 372B, it is illegal to solicit for the purpose of prostitution, and as such, this is a crime that prostitutes can face up to 1 year of imprisonment for if found to be guilty. What this essentially means is that prostitutes can prostitute themselves to you, but they just can offer themselves to you. In other words, they can provide sexual service, they just can approach anyone. So, sex workers are denied their right to seek work for their survival. They are denied from pursuing their source of income. The law criminalizes prostitutes for trying to sustain themselves and yet allow prostitution service. They may only lie at the mercy of men to survive. This mirrors the larger phenomena in society in which sex work is largely stigmatized and shamed, but yet the same people who point and shame are the one who participate in it, who take part in it, uses its service, necessitate its existence. Another material aspect of patriarchal oppression can be seen in the wealth gap. A woman's labor is actively undervalued under patriarchy. Issues such as menstruation, maternity leave, hormones are used as an excuse to denotate weakness and thus less useful as an employee. Women with children are undervalued because, in the eyes of the employer, a woman's primary role is always perceived to be the caretaker. Thus, having children means she will not be able to commit to her job, therefore giving her a lower salary. Even in equal position or authority, women are most likely to be disregarded in a decision-making situation compared to their male counterpart because women are deemed to be emotional or irrational. Even in clerical and similar professions, men predominate in high-ranking roles while women dominate subservient roles. It is the same for sales and service occupational groups, where men dominate the managerial position while women work as maids, cleaners, and waitresses. It is obvious that this division line of labor along sexual lines occurs not only in the same group, but also among different occupational groups. Hence, men dominate high and honorable position, whereas women mainly and commonly found they are commonly found at the bottom of the pyramid. Women are lower to domestic tasks due to patriarchal gender norms. In Malaysia, it is commonly known that care, other familiar and personal responsibilities are the reason why 67% of women are not included in the labor force, whereas it's only 2% for men. Evidently, this directly implies and negatively impacts a woman's participation in Malaysia's labor force. Furthermore, in Malaysia, women suffer from cultural belief that set them back from labor participation. All Malaysian women are heavily affected by deep-seated political and cultural beliefs regarding the contribution of both men and women towards the social and economy, respectively. For example, Muslim Malays believe that men and women are standing in equal position, but they have different gender roles that they have to abide by. Women are heavily responsible for reproductive labor. Other than that, in Chinese and Indian Malaysian culture, although they are fundamentally different, patriarchy, hierarchy, and age are very important to these cultures. This is shown when men are the head of the family, whereas women are given the pleasure of high status of a mother or grandmother. This has been instilled to their minds since young, and they are obligated to execute it. Therefore, the women who enter the workforce often find themselves entangled in a challenging situation when it's regarding familial care, wage, and finding the balance between the two. Significantly, the major reason why most women drop out from the Malaysian labor market is not only because of the difficulties in finding balance between work and family, but it's also because care work is highly considered to be a woman's responsibility. So, according to the Statistic Department's Salaries and Wages Survey Report Malaysia 2008, women only make 95 of men's pay in Malaysia. Surprising, isn't it? In this next slide, the dismissal of women's worth in her existence can even be seen in our citizenship law. Our federal constitution discriminates against Malaysian women who give birth abroad to a foreign spouse. Her child won't automatically be granted a Malaysian citizenship, whereas a Malaysian man who has a child overseas can confer his citizenship on his child. This discrimination exemplifies the difference between status held by a mother versus a father. With all that being said, patriarchy is not just a man versus women's battle. Men are also a victim and they suffer from the patriarchal system as well. Not only that, they are expected to conform to patriarchal beauty standards, which means having muscular bodies or taller height. Men who are considered skinny will often be compared to muscular men, generating a deep body insecurity. The term masculinity expects men to dominate during any sexual activity. This exerts pressure for men to lose their virginity early and sleep with as many women as possible, because the higher the body count, the more men you are, as I stated previously. This results in men with lower body count or men who are virgin ended up being stigmatized as less manly. Most importantly, toxic masculinity dehumanizes men. By being shamed for expressing their emotions, men are prevented from developing intimate social bonds with other people, as well as finding acceptance with their own emotional needs. Combined with the pressure of expectation to be the breadwinner of his family, men suffer from patriarchal expectations that are harmful, destructive, and dangerous to their own well-being. Hence, the death by suicide occurred about 1.7 more times more often than female in 2015. In the Western world, male die by suicide 3 to 4 times more often than female. This greater male frequency is increased in those over the age 65. Now, we all have heard of women empowerment, women who support women, but it is important to be aware that just because you are a woman, it does not mean you can't take part in patriarchy. Internalized misogyny is when women subconsciously project sexist ideas onto another woman, even onto themselves, sorry. Examples such behavior is when women shame other women or girls for being a slut or for being too girly. Mothers also shame their daughters for not being wife material too. They also have internalized misogyny. Internalized misogyny pits women against each other. For example, comparing which celebrity wore which dress better. As a result of this, women would always compare themselves onto another woman. This is mainly due to the years and years of conditioning from society on how women are supposed to be. In the nutshell, we have established that the patriarchal system will always work to oppress women by praising and encouraging traits that put women in a subordinate position or by enabling behaviors that harm women in any way. We can see this in rape culture and victim blaming. We see this in the preservation of gender roles within the family, within the ideal of wife material and the workplace. We also see how patriarchy is institutionalized, how the law works to uphold this ideology and preserve this reality. As activists, we play a part in fighting for equality by challenging and dismantling our internal biases and problematic behaviors, but also recognizing the larger system that we need to fight against. As such, overcoming patriarchy doesn't mean challenging individual attitudes. It means going against institutions and laws that enforce it. Being anti patriarchy isn't just a fight by women for women, it is a fight that must be fought by all for the liberation of everyone. Alrighty then, that is all from me today. I will pass the floor to my friend Tiana.
Okay. Hello. Hi, guys. My name is Tiana, and I am a co-founder for MISI Solidariti. And today I will be talking about racism. So in the next slide, racism is basically a system that undervalues your worth as a person because of how you look and the circumstances of your birth. The darker you are, the more out of the norm you are, the more negative connotations, labels, and treatments are attached to the attribute of you that you cannot change. Like, life is not a video game. There is no character customization. It's not like The Sims where you can choose your body type, the type of like the color of your skin, the gender you are, what kind of neighborhood you want to live in. It is not like that. Instead of wishing for physical characteristics and circumstances of birth, we should acknowledge what are these really subtle traits that we still have ingrained in our minds and the blatant mistreatment that happens all around us. We first must tackle it within ourselves before branching out to the outside world and making a change. Like, the moment you are brought into this world as a minority, everything is already against you. Jobs, education, housing, any opportunity you can think of favors the majority and keeps the majority in best interest. It literally deprives you of opportunities. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about systemic discrimination. In the next slide, I will talk, okay, systemic discrimination is patterns, policies that are set in stone, which makes up the structure of our society, and it creates disadvantages and privilege disparity. Okay, so this systemic discrimination, like hence the name, it's not individualized, isolated cases of discrimination. It's not like one person facing, it's like the entire community. It's not just one thing. It's just like, it's not just one off thing where you grit your teeth and you just bear with it and move on. This oppressive force is upheld by all pervasive institutions, which I'll get into later. But these institutions are necessary for our survival. And these systemic discriminations have very, very long-lasting consequences. It brings so much harm to smaller communities, especially minorities, and like ethnic groups are systematically put and kept in poverty just because of it. So here you see observations of systemic discrimination. There are three types of observations of systemic discrimination. There's numerical data, policies, policy making, and organizational structure. So in the next slide, I talk what is these three observations. So numerical data, it doesn't usually give proof, but it's a very, very huge red flag indicator. Policies, on the other hand, like policy making, these policies are made to keep the dominant culture in the best interest. And then we move on to the third, which is organizational behavior. Organizational behavior is basically upholding these internal cultures that can marginalize others. Like, for example, at the top of my head, like valuing another communication style. So this systemic discrimination, we're going to use the Indian ethnicity in Malaysia as a case study. So it exists, it is institutionalized and normalized, and it's baked into our laws and constitution. So first up, I'm going to talk about our education disparity here in Malaysia, which is really, really bad. It affects economically burdened non-Bumiputra the most. Okay, other than government school quotas, not including vernacular schools like Chinese and Indian schools, a lot of people, especially middle-class citizens, face notable discrimination when signing up for pre-university and furthering education. Government schooling by far is the most affordable way to obtain education. By giving you the tools you need to prepare for the working world, you need education to, prepare yourself to get a job and make money, make the bacon. So like the government schooling that I was talking about before, this includes skill set programs, matriculation schools, vocational schools. Like all of these schools are very affordable ways to attain education. But you see, these affordable ways of obtaining education, they're only catered to Bumiputra, like making the means of obtaining it almost unavailable to all or most races. Okay, so I'm going to talk about like the 90-10 ratio. So if you guys don't know what the 90-10 ratio, basically it means like when the school's accepting students, it's like 90% Bumiputra and 10% Bumiputra. So remember when I talked about just now about the three types of observations, this is observation number 2, which is policy making. Okay, then moving on to the next thing of like how it discriminates the Indian ethnicity. So according to statistics, there are 2,439 secondary schools out there, but there are no Tamil secondary schools. And that is only secondary school. What about the systemic discrimination you face when it's time to enroll into college? Like if you are non-Bumiputra and you are poor, you're economically burdened, like what other choice do you have? It's either you take Form 6, which is like one of the hardest exams in the world, STPM, or you go for private education, which you have to like shell out tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars for. Okay, now we go back again on like how it affects Indians. The disparity of the statistic itself, like the one in the 2,400 schools, the disparity of that should tell you that education and the preservation of of the Indian community's mother tongue, Tamil, is not a priority and it's left on the back burner, and it's not even considered something good, something worth investing for in the government. And also this discriminatory elements also affects them while they are young. Like this statistic right here, where Indians rank lowest in the national elementary school examination, and 1 in every 12 Indian children don't even attend primary school. So in my next slide, this is like just a bunch of statistics to back up my claim about private school being super expensive. So like if you read like the first row is like public school is about 6,000 to the most expensive 15,000 for like 3 years. Whereas even like for like savvy private school, you have to shell out like at least an extra $50,000 to $60,000. So if you were born as a non-Bumi and your parents were like making 3,000, 2,000 a month, and your household income was probably like 5,000 a month, how are you supposed to afford good education, and like the education that you can afford is not given to you. So this is systemic discrimination. Next, I'm going to talk about housing and how it affects poor non-Bumis and also affects poor Bumiputras. So the Bumiputra privilege, which is, if you guys don't know, the Article 153 of the Constitution, it basically gives corporate equity to poorer Bumiputras to become homeowners. It's a very, very great solution, no doubt, to like, to rise up the numbers of homeowners, but it had many, many flaws. Like, for example, one of the flaws is, okay, you are Bumiputra, but what if you don't have the money? How do you enjoy the discount when you have no money for the house in the first place? Like, yeah, there are even like government initiatives that provide cheaper houses like Prima and stuff like that, which are roughly like 170,000 to 250,000. But how are you supposed to afford that when you only make crumbs and you have a family to feed and children to pay for their education? So because of this Bumiputra privilege, more economically competent Bumiputras utilize this advantage instead. So they buy these cheaper houses and they rent it out for more profit, like quote unquote passive income. So remember back when I talked about the second observation, policy making, this policy is like the access granted for housing has such a huge disparity and it's even reinforced by the policy. And then like next I talk about if you see on the slide, the 46% of Indians report facing discrimination, that falls onto organizational behavior. It's like how 46% of Indians, like according to statistics, they face discrimination in the process of finding a place to stay, be it like they want to buy a house or they want to rent a house. So this is so flawed because how can you come up with a contingency plan to solve the wealth disparity of one status but not the other statuses? And also like housing is a human right. How can you make the way of obtaining that differ amongst the races? Like to me, it's just overt racism disguised as affirmative action. Okay, and then next, I'm going to talk about jobs. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about jobs and how it discriminates against the Indian ethnicity. So basically, the job market, as we all know, is very discriminatory, especially to Malays and Indians. But I'm just going to give this in the point view of an Indian because since I'm using it as a case study. So this is a disclaimer. This view is slowly based on the employment culture in Chinese or multinational companies that prefer Chinese or light-skinned candidates. So I'm sure all of you have faced it before, like you're walking down the mall and you see the flyers and then they say, yeah, we have a job vacancy, but you have to speak Mandarin. But the thing is like speaking Mandarin is just like, it's just a cover up. It's like, yeah, it's considered a huge factor, but people like, for example, for me, like I'm a Chinese person who can't speak Chinese and definitely they wouldn't hire me. And so it just disadvantages everyone. And then when you want to call out the company saying like, oh, why do you say speaking Mandarin, but you don't even hire like Malays or Indians that speak Mandarin? And then they like try to cover it up when in fact employers use it as a front when they still look for Chinese candidates. Okay, and then next, I'm going to talk about the lack of acknowledgement of nationality in East Malaysia. So I'm going to talk about the state perpetuated erasure. Sorry, guys, state perpetuated erasure of Sabah and Sarawak. So basically, wait, I'm so sorry. Give me a moment. Yeah, how like I don't know whether you guys noticed, but when you sign up for a form and stuff like that, it always says Malay, Chinese, Indian, and others. So basically, we all know that Sabah and Sarawak has so many different ethnicities and so many different like subdivisions like Bidayo, Iban, Kadazan, but they're all erased, they're all lumped together. And then like we perpetuated the thinking that, oh, you just have to label yourself as others, basically like erasing their identity. And like the lack of media representation, you rarely hear news of Sabah and Sarawak because their voices are silenced, and how the historic erasure of both states from Sejarah textbooks Like if I remember correctly, like when it talked about September the 16th, where Sabah and Sarawak became one with Malaysia, it was like only like one paragraph when they talk about the first Independence Day of 31st of August. They like hyped it up. They wrote it super duper long. So basically, like it's also like how we celebrate Merdeka. When I was talking about August 31st, like August 31st is very peninsula centric. It basically erases the history when Sabah and Sarawak was joined together in Malaysia. Next, I talk about state perpetuated erasure. So I'm going to talk about the MA63 agreement. So if you guys don't know what the MA63 agreement is, basically the agreement they did on 1963, where Peninsula Malaysia promises autonomy and revenue for Sabah and Sarawak, but it fails to keep their promises. So like the failure of keeping promises continues to leave Sabah and Sarawak in poor infrastructure, and there's no support of the digital divide, and it sucks them dry of natural resources. Like a statistic that I think will make everyone angry is that Sarawak, like they supply about 60% of Malaysia's petroleum, but the revenue they get is only like 6%. So we are paying them peanuts for what they're providing for us, how much they're supporting us economically as well. So, and then next, I want to talk about the removal of customary land rights, where it basically takes away the native land rights, and then how the Kadazan Dusun natives were forced to convert into Islam because Islamic missionaries were coming to Sabah, Sarawak, and how they favor Malay Muslims in civil service. So another statistic, like Malays in Sarawak only make up about 20%, but Muslim Malays make up about 75% of civil servants in Sarawak. So it's just telling that like, oh yeah, okay, we're considered equal, but I'm gonna give all of the enjoyment of civil service to Malay Muslims only. Okay, then next I'm gonna talk about how systemic discrimination leads to poverty and how it affects the Indian race again. So poverty pushes people to commit crimes to make ends meet. Like corrupted morality is not the root cause of the crime. It's the deprivation of social welfare that causes the crime. It's not about having a bad bone. It's not about being inherently evil. These people take part in gangs, rob, steal, and break into houses out of desperation. Like this is the direct consequence when you deprive people of opportunities. Like every opportunity that's taken from you pushes you further to a point when you have to make drastic decisions. Like systemic discrimination is all the things I listed above. Without those rights readily available, people are forced to take risks and involve themselves in crime. Okay, and like how the Indian community is affected again. Like Indians make up about 2.6 million, make up half of 2.6 million at the bottom income ladder, and also 41% of child beggars are Indian. And then in the next slide, I'm going to talk more in depth about Malaysian Indian gangs. So Indian gangs, although not the majority, they are formed due to the result of state neglect and targeted as criminals. Like historical labor discrimination also plays a part, like underpaying, lack of social mobility, lack of opportunities. So these gangs, instead of elevating their socioeconomic status, they have violence inflicted into them. So the way our government is handling these situations are very, very poor. And like it's not up to them to work harder to climb up the social ladder and to break out of the cycle. Our system needs to be amended, and socioeconomic disparities need to be diminished to solve this issue. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the subtle manifestations of racism. Okay, one of the subtle manifestations of racism is xenophobia. So xenophobia, both of these systems actually intersect a lot, especially when it comes about discussing migrant labor, like xenophobia and racism, they intersect a lot. So like one thing we all heard a lot, especially me, like growing up, I always hear my mom and dad calling, like when Caucasians come into our country, oh, they're coming to work here, they are expatriates. But then when a POC person comes to our country and work, my parents will call them migrant laborers. So it's very subtle, these xenophobic tendencies. Like why do we call POC migrants, but we call Caucasians expatriates? So xenophobia is not always like, hey, go back to your own country and stuff like that. It can be very, very subtle, and you yourself can partake without realizing, like how I did. So we attach more positive connotations to people with lighter skin and negative connotations to people with darker skin tones. And also, like, because of like society and stuff like that, when we hear the word expat, we always think about like a white person in business suits, have nice shoes, have nice leather office bags. But when we hear migrants, we think about factory workers, hygiene workers, and much more. The next subtle manifestation of racism I would like to talk about is colorism and how it affects the Indian community a lot. Colorism in Malaysia is rampant, very, very rampant. Like even, I think last week where the singer Chu Hao Ren, he released that music video, that's just a proof that colorism in Malaysia is so normalized to this day. So the negative connotations that are attached to dark skin is perceived as unattractive and dangerous. And because of this bizarre social construct, like darker skinned Indians and especially darker skinned Indian women are expected to take skin lightening products. And like here you can see like on top of it, like the most notorious brand you can think about is Fair and Lovely, who has perpetuated so many years of colorism through their advertisements and stuff like that. So there are so many standards for Indians to uphold and to be accepted, like to be lighter skin. And that is because Indians in Malaysia are expected to be the golden minority. So what is the golden minority? The golden minority is basically for the Indian individual to present themselves as non-threatening and omit their accent that was developed by speaking their mother tongue for so many years, present themselves as sophisticated, look smart and well-read. And this is so harmful because basically society is saying, I can only accept you if I put you in this one mold. Like, I can only accept you if you look, you talk, and you present yourself in a different way, in the way that I can accept. So that's all for me. I'm going to pass it to my friend Pravin on his part of capitalism.
All right. Thanks, Diana. Thanks, Shana, for giving us the introduction on the first two root causes we're going to discuss today, right? So based on the explanation, I think we are at a good point now on understanding some of the key social issues that we have in our Malaysian society and how these root causes are playing a part, right? Now, the last piece of the puzzle is about understanding capitalism, okay? So what is capitalism? Now, this is not going to be a Capitalism 101 lecture. I'm not qualified to do that even, but this is for us to appreciate and have an understanding of how capitalism plays, is being a root cause for some of the key issues that we have in our society, right? So what is capitalism? Basically, this is an economic system that we've seen for the past 200 years, right? It replaced feudalism. And the main focus of capitalism is the for profit, okay? So when it was first introduced, it actually gave the working class a social mobility, right? Meaning which people can jump from one job to another in search of high wages, right? Which means a better quality of life for them, right? But this fact did not last long, right? Because this drive for profit, this concept has led to this skyrocketing growth of production, because capitalism focuses on like more, everything is massive, right? So there's a lot of goods, a lot of food, everything is just like brought up to a very, like a much larger scale. But the fact is that demand only cares about money, right? So when it comes to like providing free services like healthcare or access to water, things like that are not actually they don't play well in the capitalist economy, right? So what happens is that humanity is essentially reduced to like dollar signs alone, right? And the main concept like that comes underlining capitalism is that it thrives off of exploitation. It doesn't care about morals, it doesn't care about humans or welfare and whatnot. It only cares about profit, right? So capitalism actually, when from what Tiana's and Shana's explanation, we can draw the line that it actually enables racism and patriarchy in itself, right? Because when you think about it, right, patriarchy and racism, it dehumanizes and devalue human beings, right? Capitalism, on the other hand, uses this concept to justify undervaluing the labor of social minorities, basically, right? Because one clear example that we have today in our society is how the gender pay gap still exists even today, right? And it's as much as a bigger problem, as much of a problem as we had a couple hundred years ago, right? Because the thing is, capitalism doesn't do this on purpose, right? But because of the focus of capitalism, that it basically wants only profit, and capitalism will do anything to squeeze every ounce of profit from human beings, right? So what it does is that it leverages its existing power structures and goes into this mode of consolidating it and enabling patriarchy and racism, right? So where you're ending up in a vicious cycle that is never ending, and all of these three constructs are essentially enabling each other in a circle, right? And that's just how it's impacting each other, and we can see some of the examples I'm going to talk about now, right? So impacts of capitalism. Obviously, it's right and rampant, and how capitalism has shaped our economy and a lot of our thoughts as well, right? But let's take a look at some examples and impacts that capitalism has left on us. So people often are deprived of basic needs because things like water and access to healthcare, these things are not going to put money in your pocket, right? Because if you follow the capitalism, the baseline of it, anything that doesn't put money in your pocket, it's not worth caring about, right? So let's take an example. So in Kelantan, there was a water cut back in 2019, right? So there's been a water crisis since then. Till today, there's no proper solution so the few villages in Kelantan, till today, they have to rely on wells and rivers for their water supply. And the government has only taken temporary measures, right? With like sending lorries of water where people have to line up in queues, fill up their buckets and use that for the daily use. But there's no systematic changes to resolve these issues, right? Because like capitalism says, it's not worth caring about, right? The next is commodification of services, right? So like Tiana mentioned earlier, how education has become a business, right? So commodifying education is essentially locking this supposedly noble service into behind a price tag, right? Now, like Tiana mentioned, there's the skyrocketing cost of education has put us in a place where kids coming out of college, a lot of people are forced to take the private education route, and to pay for that, you often have to take loans, and then you're already in debt, right? So how can you expect when you're out of school, you're just graduating, you may have gotten your first job, and you're already fed back 20 years because of your lifelong debt? Right? The fact is that education is a fundamental right, but the system that we have embraced in our society thus far has not only made it impossible to provide free education, but also a controversial one. And that's just a terrible feeling. Right? Now, the next point I want to bring about is how capitalism has also enabled the society that we live in to judge or determine a person's worth based on their productivity alone. Right? So it shows that how we don't value humans for humans, but they do instead, right? So this concept of ableism has existed for a while now, and it puts in place where the society classify entire groups of people as less than just because they may be disabled, right? And this comes with a lot of harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalization of people with disabilities, and that's just not okay, right? Just because they're less than and you're able-bodied doesn't mean that you're not better than they're not better than you, right? And one example I want to quote here is the fact that how some of the autistic kids that we have in Malaysia are encouraged, like, so doctors do encourage them to participate or go to a normal school, right? But then the education system that we have doesn't allow that, because once a kid is diagnostic or something, they will send you to the special school. Now, don't get me wrong, it is good that we have dedicated schools to help these children, but when the medical practice or like doctors are themselves are advising us to send these kids to mingle with like other children, it's only for their good, right? But our system doesn't allow that, right? And the last thing I want to go on is the fact that something I'm guilty of as well, the fact that we see hustle culture and how we glorify this hustle culture. Now, all of us, like young adults, as we get our first jobs, or like even in school, right, in college, you are studying like a side business, drop shipping and whatnot, and you're just saying like, oh, I'm hustling and I'm gonna make more money and I'm gonna do more. It just we do like nothing wrong with that, right? But we do need to consider the fact that this thought was put upon because of the capitalist economy that we've nurtured all this while, right? It's so ingrained in our hearts that that's how we think, that's how we function, and we all play a part in this as well, right? Now, some people may be lucky enough to not face some of these oppressions or impacts of capitalism, but let me tell y'all, capitalism is coming for us, regardless of if we want it or not, because it goes beyond social aspects alone. Right? Capitalism is also impacting our environment to a large extent, right? Because think about it, right? Capitalism is demanding a limitless growth on the environment that we live in, which means that it's always going to be needing more and more resources to produce more. Everything is massive and consuming more of our environment, right? Now, let's talk about two examples here. Now, the first one is how I'm going to talk about carbon emissions, right? So 71% of the global carbon emissions comes from only about 100 large corporations worldwide, right? And that just shows that how a tiny group of companies can impact the environment terribly, right? The next example is how it's more us, right? Because let's take this quick stat. Fishing net waste was found to be about 46% in the ocean, whereas plastic straws was less than 1%, right? Now, don't get me wrong, right? It's good. Like, it's good that you're trying to do away with plastics. Metal straws are good. It's created awareness across the globe. All of the top companies are switching to paper straws or no straws at all. But the fact is, unless these large corporations unless they reduce their overall plastic production, there will be little to no environmental impact, right? So, like you can see here, the banning of straws may confer as a moral license to companies. Like, oh, I've done my part. I've created awareness. I've stopped using it. But it should go beyond the social media campaign alone, right? Now, let's take a look at some of the key examples on how capitalism is impacting the working class a bit, right? So, like I said here, capitalism was introduced and it really gave the working class an edge, right? Because they were able to jump from one job, they were getting paid more, and the competition was created, which is good because there was a lot of jobs and lesser people. But now we are in a state where we have a lot more people than jobs, right? So some of the examples that we're going to talk about today, let's look at Amazon, right? Everyone's heard about it, the terrible working conditions, their terrible pay, people peeing in water bottles just so that they can meet their time and all that. So we've heard about it. But I want to bring your attention to this case happening locally as well, right? Our own Top Glove, the COVID headquarters, right? So we found there were recent reports of overworked employees where they've been clocking in about 111 hours because of the global increased demand, right? So obviously they're a great business because of the pandemic, but this made them force their employees to work a lot longer, which is actually against the Malaysian law. Right? And we also found out there was also reports of how the employees were living in terrible conditions where I think about 24 workers had to share one room, and which only puts them at a higher risk for getting COVID in the first place, right? So despite having large cluster, Top Glove has not taken any measures to ensure the safety of their workers. Right? Now, if I want to move on to the next example, how contract workers are treated, right? So contract workers, basically, these are people who work in government hospitals, schools, and other government establishments. They are often deprived of, they don't get proper pay, first of all. They don't get any benefits from their employment, nor is there a job security for them. So, and the fact is that these are most likely foreign workers. So employers get to abuse them by paying them very little money and give them no benefits whatsoever, and just run their business by making a lot of profit, right? The worst part of it all is that we've seen reports of how protective gears are not given to some of the employees, right? So especially people like hospital cleaners and janitors, when they should be considered frontliners, they are, in today's situation that we have, in today's Malaysian context, they are not going to be considered as frontliners, right? Because they are organic employees of for the government, right? So this shows that how these little technicalities and how this focus on profit has been impacting the working class heavily, right? And last example is about how our Malaysian palm oil economy works, right? Because like we said, we're one of the largest producers of palm oil, which is good, right? Great for us as a country. But the thing is, we are affecting our, again, working class is being oppressed because we are a largest producer. We have to work overtime. The workers that we have in this industry have to work extra just to meet the global demands. And we also cannot deny the fact that mass deforestation is happening to continue the plantations, right? To replant, and how long would it take to do that, right? So we are compromising both socially and environmentally to feed profit for these companies, right? So capitalism is essentially doomed to inequality, right? The whole structure itself, mainly because I want to highlight this, right? The interest of capitalists versus the interest of workers, they're always going to be at odds, right? So they're never going to align. That's a fact, right? Because capitalists will always want they want to pay low wages and not, pay more or take care of the welfare. They just want to maximize their profit margin. Whereas for the workers, they want a larger proportion of the wealth they produce, and they want better working conditions, essentially. Right? So these two interests are essentially reconcilable, because there's no way these things are coming to a agreement, right? Because you can have a lot of labor unions and all these movements that's going to help laborers to meet their goals better, but fundamentally this won't come along together, right? And beating the system is almost impossible. Right? So no matter what we do, we cannot escape capitalism, because it's actually the fundamental root cause for almost all of the social or all of the social issues that we see today, right? And given that it enables other problematic social constructs, it's a bigger reason why we cannot avoid this issue at all, right? So what can we do? Now, it's important that we need to recognize our complicity and refuse to participate in oppression where we can. Right? If we do see problems, we need to call out at the small level even, because I know you may not have the right establishment or the larger companies or the right platform for us to provide that view or opinion, but it's important that we need to call out from now at our small level so that it causes a ripple effect, because every small changes would impact in a larger change at some point, right? And it's important that we practice compassion and empathy to everyone around us to make sure that we understand these root causes and we try to put some effort in finding a resolution for it. Right? All right, so that's all from me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and we'll be answering them right now.
Feel free if you guys have any questions here.
So you can ask questions, you can stay here and ask questions, or we'll be doing a 10-minute break short. So you can go for a break or stay here and ask questions. We'll be back in 10 minutes, yeah.
Are you ready for Chinese New Year?
Shout now!
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and
Hey guys. All right, so I think we've had two questions from the audience earlier. It's mainly about what are the solutions to the issues presented that we discussed today, and how can we reach out to the rural communities, right? So in terms of solutions that we're facing that for these some of the social issues, right? All right, so I think we've had two questions from these root causes that we discussed. Right? The first step is always the social awareness, right? So when you think about patriarchy or racism, those are issues that we face on a daily basis. Like I face discrimination because of my color personally before, and as like an individual like participating in society, you can also act to avoid those problems, right? Because if you see discrimination happening on a social context, you can call out those people and make sure that the people are educated. Like, you know, if you're someone in your family is making those mistakes or using a derogatory term and whatnot, we can actually act on that. When it comes to capitalism itself, it's more of a systemic issue, and obviously all these root causes has the systemic level of issues as well. And for those, I would say that we need better laws and checks and balances, right? So, for example, like things like your healthcare or education, these things are supposed to be free and must be provided to the people. But there needs to be checks and balances for it, because we cannot take down the capitalist economy as like a group of it's a group of people, right? Because it's not an individual concept, right? It's an economy that is prevalent around the world, and a lot of systems are built based upon the capitalist economy as well, right? So those are the key things that we can start doing as a first step. To first is recognizing, and second is to make sure that these checks and balances are in place to keep these larger corporations or capitalist enablers to make sure that the welfare is taken care of. Second question was about how do you reach out to the rural communities, right? So thank you for the question, right? Because I think one of the key things that we need to recognize is that when we have workshops like this, yes, we're covering target audience, and a lot of times, like people who need to know about this may not get to know, right? So this is our first step, right? We're trying to create this awareness in this community that we are now. But I think once we have better access to the rural areas, especially after the pandemic, I think we want to make sure that those who don't get access to these resources get to it as well, right? Through road shows or publications on more mass media, right? For example, so those will be the measures that we will be taking moving forward, right? So I hope I was able to answer your questions. Thank you so much again for listening, and I'll pass it on to Victor and Brian for the next section.
Thank you, Pravin. Hi again, guys. I'm Victor. You guys saw me earlier. Hope you guys didn't miss me. This is Brian with an I. Brian, I'll give you a moment to introduce yourself.
No, it's fine. I'm good with people knowing me as Brian with an I. That's it.
All right. This is Brian with an I with arguably the best haircut and hair color in this room. Anyway, Brian with an I, could you pull up the slides?
Yeah, pulling it up now. Y'all are able to hear me clearly, right?
There's a delay on the stream, so I don't think they'll be able to respond to you straight away.
But you're able to hear me clearly?
Yes.
All right. Are we seeing things?
Yes, I see the slides.
All right, great.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Brian and I will present to you guys the concept of intersectionality, and as it says on the slide, what is it and why it's crucial in our activism. Prior to this, Pravin, Tiana, and Shana had laid the foundations for y'all, discussing some of the root causes that plague our society today. Now we're going to take the analysis one step further and see how these oppressions, these system of oppressions, these power structures play with each other in this ecosystem of suffering. Next slide, please. So what is intersectionality? As you can see on the slide, I'll read it out for y'all. Intersectionality is the concept that oppressions aren't separated, but rather inseparable from each other, similar to how people themselves don't hold just one identity, but various ones. What do I mean by this? We view society as a series of different identity-based oppressions most of the time. So we've got homophobia, sexism, transphobia, racism, etc., etc., etc. We know these. We even touched on some of these earlier. But a mistake that was made in the past, and one that people are learning from now, is that we separate these issues into the different niches or silos. So you got one group of people fighting homophobia, you got another group of people fighting racism, you got another group of people fighting patriarchy. But the reality is, when people are subject to these oppressions, they're not just subject to one kind of oppression. Most people have multiple identities. The only people that are subject to one kind of oppression either exist on movie screens or are made of straw. So intersectionality is just the concept that these oppressions can't be separated from each other. That when people face oppressions on the basis of their unique identities, it creates unique experiences, which we're going to go on to expand. Next slide, please. So this is, as you guys know, a Venn diagram. And in Venn diagrams, you have intersections, hence the name intersectionality. No one person shares one of the identities listed here. There's no way you just have a race. You're going to have an age, you're going to have a class. If you don't, I'm afraid you're not a real human being. You're made of straw. So intersectionality is about tackling the unique experiences that people face when their identities intersect. And we're going to give you guys an example in the next slide. And this is also the story of how intersectionality became an issue that to be analyzed, became a coined term. So in the 70s, the United States is going through an economic crisis. Background information you guys don't need to know. General Motors Works, GM, wanted to lay off workers. Crisis, had to cut back costs. You know the whole spiel. So one of their officers, they fired 5 black women. They laid them off to cut costs. And these black women noted that, hey, we're all black women. Why didn't any other women in the office get fired? Or why didn't any other black people get fired? Something's up here. They targeted us specifically because we're black women. So they took this case to court. Now, the United States, for all its ills, is progressive in some areas, and one of those is employee discrimination laws. And they took this case to court on the basis that they were discriminated on the basis of identity, on their race, and on their gender. So they argued, like the slide says, that they were fired not because they were just women, not because they were just black, but because they were black women. And that made them a unique minority in that office space that other people didn't share. However, the courts couldn't entertain the case because unfortunately the legal provisions at the time didn't have a clause for intersecting identities. You only had discrimination on the basis of gender and discrimination on the basis of race. No one thought that it could come together. So Kimberly Crenshaw had noted this case specifically. Kimberly Crenshaw is a scholar in this field. And she coined the term intersectionality to describe the phenomena that she observed here. And it was initially a legal term used to describe how people may be discriminated on the basis of these multiple identities, as we illustrated. Now, this term intersectionality has grown out of the legal sphere and is generally being used in discussions and discourse around oppression in general. And a very important note to posit is that intersectionality argues that you segment these different groups. If you only fight for Black liberation, or if you only fight for women's liberation, or you only fight for queer liberation, you fail to meet the needs of the people that intersect these identities. You leave them out of the discussion because most people fill that gap, and up until very recently, that wasn't realized. So I hand the floor back to Brian to give you guys a few examples, Venn diagrams of how intersectionality manifests in our world today. And yeah, Brian?
Okay, thanks, Victor. This next part discusses intersectionality as the observation of power imbalances. So how we can use this as a lens to observe the power imbalances around us. All right, aspects of identity. We are all complex people, and that is because of our several overlapping aspects of identity. And I'm sure the audience is able to point out some identities that are not included in the slide, like race and national origin. So with every of these aspects, it is usually linked or connected to an oppressive force, regardless of whether or not it affects you. So for example, gender and sexism, race and racism, ability and ableism, and so on. So you'll come to realize that all of these oppressive forces overlaps as well. Different combinations of forces of oppression creates unique experiences. So to paint the picture, I will be providing two examples which illustrates how intersectional oppression creates unique experiences even for people within the same community. Example number one. On one hand, we have a B40 income group Malay woman, and on the other, we have a B40 Indian woman. So surely, y'all are able to group these two ladies into the same community, like women's community or the lower income group. But does that guarantee that both of their experiences are going to be the same? Let's take a look at the Venn diagram. So at first glance, you're able to tell they're both oppressed under our patriarchal system, where they face gender-based discrimination. And they're also oppressed under capitalism, where they have financial instability. But what happens when patriarchy intersects with capitalism? It creates issues such as the wage gap. The wage gap, which is covered incredibly well by one of our presenters, Shana, earlier today. And feminization of poverty, the gender division of labor, how labor associated with femininity is constantly underpaid or sometimes even unpaid. And that is their similarities. So let's take a look at how their experiences differ from each other. While the Indian woman would not be subjected to rigid scrutiny of religious institutions, the Malay woman would be constantly told to pakai tudung, tutup aurat, as a result of the modesty doctrine. And the modesty doctrine is the intersection between patriarchy and Islamic conservatism. And on the other hand, while the Malay woman would not be the target of racism and colorism in our country, the Indian woman would also face economic racism, where they are excluded from economic policies. And that is because capitalism intersects with racism. So with this example, we see that people within the same community can have unique experiences. Okay, example number two. We look at the transgender community. On one hand, we have a transgender lesbian woman, and on the other, we have a transgender gay Muslim man. All right. Without even referring to the Venn diagrams, you're able to tell, like, both of them would, the primary force of oppression that they would face is transphobia. But because both of them are also homosexuals, they are oppressed under our paradigm of heteronormativity as well. And heteronormativity intersects with transphobia to create more aversity to queer identities, otherwise known as queerphobia. And that is where their similarities end. Let's look at their differences right now. The transgender lesbian woman is a femme-aligned identity, and a femme-aligned identity is a gender identity where you fall more on the feminine end of the gender spectrum. So because of that identity, they would be subjected to misogyny. And misogyny intersects with transphobia to form a more specific form of discrimination called transmisogyny. Not only that, heteronormativity intersects with misogyny to create more aversity, more negative attitudes towards homosexual relationships, but more specifically, woman-loving woman relationships. All right, so let's take a look at the Venn diagram of the transgender gay Muslim men. The difference here is that they would be subjected to the Islamic legal system of our country, Sharia. And Sharia intersects with transphobia and heteronormativity to criminalize the identities of transgenders and homosexuals, which effectively renders the transgender gay Muslim man's very existence in our country a crime. So with this example, we see that even within the trans community, their experiences can be vastly different. Okay, why is it important to recognize these unique experiences? The first point, it is so important to reiterate over and over again, it is not a competition. Like the aforementioned examples is not at all to pit everyone against each other. In fact, we have way more in common than we do differences. So why? It's because we have to recognize the nuances of the problem. This is a nuanced problem and it cannot be treated with a blanket or uniform solution if we want to address it in a way that would validate everyone's struggles. So the next part, Victor, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. So before we proceed to the example, I want to raise two very key ideas that I want you guys to keep in mind for the rest of what I have to present to you all. First is that intersectionality not only manifests itself in the individuals it affects, but also the power structures that contribute to it. So if before this, Brian was giving you guys a telescope, now we're going to flip the telescope backwards and see the origin of these oppressions. And the second thing I want to posit to you guys is that it's not enough, like I said earlier, it's not enough to just help one group. You have to help others and also people that intersect. But it's also important to think about because of how these power structures are intersectional in their own way, does helping one group come at the cost of others? And if that's the case, are you really making the world a better place when you do that? So, like the slide says, you can't be anti-oppression if you are not intersectional. And you cannot view oppressive power structures as separate because they all feed into each other. And I'll explain in this example. Ryan, thank you. So, everyone, y'all know the police. We love who here loves the police? I don't. I mean, I like the band The Police. They're my second favorite band. But here we're talking about policing as an institution. In our root causes presentation, we had posited to you guys patriarchy, racism, and capitalism. Now we're going to apply these to the institution of policing. All of you are familiar with sexism, patriarchy. We mentioned this earlier. There's a glass ceiling. It makes it harder for women to progress in the workforce, have promotions in their career, etc., etc., etc. So let's take the police force, for example. Because of patriarchal attitudes in our society, because of the glass ceiling, women may find it harder for them to progress their career in the police force, harder to climb the ranks of the police force. So then, how do we solve this? Just for the sake of argument, let's just have an anti-sexism campaign in the police, push for more female police officers, push for more women to take up managerial positions in the police force. But does this liberation for women really mean anything? It comes at the cost of minorities. Very good real-life example I want to posit to you guys is Kamala Harris. She was Attorney General of California for like 5 years. And, girl power, more female representation and higher echelons of power. But do you guys think that she was rightly using girl power when she had preyed on poor single black mothers and sent them to prison for children's truancy, or putting trans men into female prisons? I don't think that's making the world a better place, even though we have more female representation at higher echelons of power. So we have to think about how these institutions that we claim to want to liberate people within also feed to these oppressive mindsets or these oppressive social relations. So to further expand on that, we talked about the racism just now. We know that the police force engages in police misconduct, and racial minorities are more likely to be subject to police misconduct. For example, in Malaysia, the Indian population makes up 9% of the country, or 7%. And as far as their statistics in police misconduct, they make up 27% of all reported deaths in police custody. Mind you, this is just a statistic for reported deaths in police custody. This doesn't count all the times where Indian people were injured, abused. These cases have gone unreported. All these cases didn't happen in police custody. So the numbers could be wildly worse. Now, let's expand on our earlier example where we say we just push for anti-sexism in the police force. Now let's push for anti-racism in the police force. Let's try and get racial minorities to have more representation in the police force, more management positions, more seats in the higher echelons of power. But then we face another problem. We also know that the police force disproportionately targets poor communities because they're an easy target. And I don't know, our society just doesn't like poor people. Pravin had pointed this out just now. So when we help this minority group or that minority group, someone else is still going to get the short end of the stick. So are you really making a difference if the arm of oppression is multicolored? Someone else is still getting beaten up. It's just that it's a rainbow arm now. Next slide, please. So with the examples I had highlighted to you earlier, you have to look at society as one large hierarchical system, and all these structures that contribute to these oppressions are inseparable from them. Just like how people's identities are inseparable from all the intersecting identities, these structures are also inseparable from the oppressions they create. So we need to think about society beyond these power structures. And just to hammer in the point a bit more, I have a few more examples for y'all. Nestle goes around the third world commodifying natural resources and stealing them from poor people. A good example of this is they would go to water reservoirs in Bangladesh, buy private license to only be the only ones to take water from it for bottling, and they would restrict the local population from using a water reservoir that they rely on. Instead, they sell bottled water from that reservoir at insane prices back to them. Now, would it make a difference to these Bangladeshi rural people if the board of directors back in Switzerland was made up of LGBT people and social minorities? That's not going to change their reality. They're still going to have their bottled water be commodified back to them. Mm-hmm. Another example, if we have more racial minorities and women in the Conservative Party, that won't change the fact that the Conservative Party hates queer people. So what's the point of helping women and racial minorities if it comes to the cost of queer people? That doesn't solve oppression. That's just climbing on top of each other to, I don't know, be the guy doing the oppression. So the point is not to play musical chairs with the oppressive power structures. It's about destroying them altogether. So like we say in the slide, seeking to diversify these existing structures will never end the oppression. Just who's doing it. A multicolored arm of oppression is still oppression. So we have to dismantle these power structures altogether. Next slide, please. Before I continue on to a few more examples to elaborate, here are some things to keep in mind when you engage in intersectional analysis. Don't engage in tokenism. Like, don't just have a woman or a minority for the sake of having a minority. That's not solving the issue. That's just patting yourself in the back and thinking, I did a good job. I did my part to solve oppression. Just because Obama is president doesn't mean black people don't face oppression anymore. So tokenism is not an answer. It's not even a band-aid. It's just a feel-good facade. Second, don't forget to include class in your oppressions. Many movements in the past and present have discounted class from their analysis of oppression. For example, feminism, up until recently, was very much focused on a subset of feminism in the first world. And it failed to take into account the different kinds of oppression that women face in other parts of the world, or just oppressions faced by poorer women in general. So class is a very important thing to include in your analysis because one, it's not really included a lot. And two, most people have a class. Most people belong somewhere in our economic ladder. If you don't, that means you're not taking part in society, in which case, most of the other oppressions probably don't apply to you. For most people, though, class is unavoidable. The only way you can avoid capitalism and class is if you go to the forest somewhere and build a cabin in the woods and ignore everything. But that's not a viable solution for most of us. So never forget class, because most important thing is money, roof on your head, education, etc., and all this ties to your class. Brian? So I'm going to give you guys a few examples, closer to home examples of the failures to and successes of applying intersectionality. The NEP, as illustrated by Tiana earlier, was a set of economic policies. It stands for the New Economic Policy, by the way, that was introduced in 1971, following May 13, 1969. Messy business we don't need to get into. Basically, In 1971, the government, Malaysian government at the time, had correctly recognized that Malay people in Malaysia were disproportionately affected by economic disparity. Most of the poor people at the time in Malaysia was Malay. So at the time, you could argue that it was a sort of proto-intersectional policy where they had recognized that capitalism and classism in general had affected Malay people more. So they had introduced the NEP to have schools exclusive to Malay people, give Malay people less loan interest or higher interest on their bank, cheaper land prices, etc., etc. And this could be, like I said, a proto-intersectional thing back in the day. But now the NEP is just used to justify Malay supremacy. It's just used to deny other minorities that rightfully should have these government privileges as well. These privileges that are supposed to help people in poverty. Because now the economic parity or disparity is a lot more in line with our racial demographics. 57% of the T20 household, T20 meaning top 20% income makers, are Malay. And about 63% of our country is Malay. I think they've solved the economic parity already. So now the NEP should have been moved to helping all poor people. So public universities should have just prioritized people that belong to the B40 and M40 communities. Cheaper land prices should have been for B40 communities, etc., etc. But it's still being maintained for Malay people only, regardless of what class they belong to. Quite clearly, it's not an intersectional program. It's a racial program. Another example, MUDA, the Malaysian United Democratic Alliance, Syed Siddique's party, basically. Last year, when MUDA was making the waves, they had first decided they want to become a party. They were inviting people to join them. And they were looking for youths, especially prominent youths, social media influencers, etc., etc. There was this one incident where, in one day, they had invited two prominent influencers, youth influencers. One was an LGBT rights activist. The other was a conservative preacher who was prominent for being anti-LGBT rights. I don't think I need to explain what the problem is here. The issue was that MUDA had only looked at these two people purely because they were youth and failed to take into account any other identities. I'm sorry to say, but youth isn't the only identity out there, and it sure as hell isn't an ideology. So you got to think about the people you're inviting and what harm they may bring to other communities, the intersection. Now let's take a good example of intersectionality. The Women's March. The Women's March in Malaysia has been ongoing for, I think, 5 years now. But starting around 2 years ago, or it's 21 already, 3 years ago, they included LGBT liberation in the Women's March agenda. And you must be wondering, wait, why are queer people being involved in the Women's March? It's for women, isn't it? Well, this is the intersectionality being taken into account. A lot of women are also queer people. So it will make perfect sense for them to push for LGBT liberation. On top of that, just like I said earlier, where people's identities intersect, the oppressions intersect too. In the context of Malaysia, the same actors of oppression that enforce patriarchy are more often than not the same actors of oppression that enforce queerphobia or homophobia and transphobia. So the people behind the Women's March appropriately recognize that they were both subject to the same people, to the same systems, to the same oppressions. So rather than have these silos where they were all separated and fighting for their own causes, it's better off to build a popular front because you can accomplish so much more than that. Divided, fractured movements cannot deliver the hard punch or the sustained pressure that is needed to defeat oppressors. It's better off to build popular fronts, especially because most of these people have the same enemy. Most of us are subject to capitalism. Most of us are subject to the same old cronies in Putrajaya. So it only hurts us when we choose to divide and silo ourselves. So be intersectional and think about how people in your community may intersect with others. With that said, I'd like to cede the floor back to Brian.
Okay. All right. So allow me to give a very, very brief recap of everything. Why intersectionality? So first of all, being in the same oppressed group does not mean everyone experiences oppression in the same way. We all have unique experiences because of our non-shared identities. Next, intersectionality versus diversity, which basically means like by diversifying, you are not, it does nothing but change who occupies the seats of power. It doesn't stop the propagation of oppression, nor does it go to the root causes of oppressive forces. And lastly, intersectionality enables us to critically analyze and destroy the power structures that give rise to the oppressions. Okay, so how can we be intersectional? First of all, broaden your scope. How we can do that, for example, start listening to LGBT folks in conversations and discussions on domestic abuse. Start listening to poor people in discussions on prison reform. Even if you're part of an oppressed group, it doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable to blind spots. So this ties in well with the second point, which is to center the voices of the most vulnerable. And lastly, collaborate with different communities, sectors, and issues. And next, Victor will conclude our presentation today.
So just to conclude and hammer in the points in for you guys, you have to combat all forms of oppression. It's not enough to just fight one type, because unless we're all free, none of us are free. 2, I know it'll be very tempting. We didn't really address this earlier. It might be very tempting to use the intersectional analysis to say, I'm more oppressed in this group, or I'm more oppressed in that group, or that group has to deal with more stuff than the other. But please don't do that. Everything we've been saying so far is to build unity, solidarity, MISI Solidarity, and a coalition building with all sorts of communities. We have nothing to gain from competing with one another. Intersectionality is not meant to be a tool to analyze who has it worse or who has it better. Intersectionality is just a tool to realize what can we do better.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, what does pave the intersection yourself? If you recognize a unique axis that isn't being covered by anybody, do it. Do it yourself. You spotted something there is a need for, something that needs people working on it for. Go ahead, start at it. Once you start, other people will join you. And even if other people don't join you, you'll be helping other communities too. Because like we said earlier, the liberation of one is the liberation of all. And with that, remember, an injury to one is an injury to all. Any questions? Okay, we have to wait a bit because it's not synced.
Oh, okay.
I'll check the YouTube if there are questions for us.
Okay.
Oh, somebody asked about who was the preacher. No, Numan was not the person that was invited to no, Numan Afifi was not invited to join Muda as far as I know. I'm sorry, I do not remember the names. The preacher, their name began with like PU something. I don't know the specific name because all of them begin with PU something, I'm afraid. They're clones of each other, carbon copies. No, not PU Jamal. And to clarify once again, because in the chat people are talking about this, Numan Afifi was not invited to Muda as far as we know. Unfortunately, we can't pull up any citations on this because it was mainly covered on Twitter. I don't think any news sources had actually covered this because this wasn't necessarily a big issue outside of quote unquote woke circles. Does anybody else have any other questions? My voice is very soft. I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, he didn't speak.
If that's the case, does anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, we're ready to go on to our next break.
Yep.
Okay, break time. See you guys in 10 minutes.
Am I audible? I'm audible, right?
Hi everyone, I'm Dandelion and I go with they or him pronouns. And today we plan to bring light to issues that aren't really talked about. And even if they were, they're quite obscure. So we want you to think and to empathize with these issues. So after that, you will be able to be all fired up, take action, direct action for the issues, heck, any issues that you want to tackle. Back to Rashid.
Right. Hi everyone, my name is Rashid. I go by he, him. Obviously the cooler, more laid back, less scary one between us two. And alongside Dandelion, in this particular segment itself, we'll be introducing to you like a couple of issues that will fatigue you out. Like just be prepared to be tired from hearing all of the details about all these issues that we'll be sharing. And it'll start with me first. I'll be talking to you about 3 issues. That'll be further by Dandelion, and we'll conclude this segment by talking to you about compassion fatigue. I promise it won't take much time. So without further ado, let's move on to the first issue. So the first issue I'll be talking to you about today is regarding exploited frontliners. So the frontline workers that we're quite familiar with are the sensationalized ones. So the sensationalized ones are doctors, nurses, the doctors that, take your COVID test, etc. So I'm not saying that it's bad that they're getting the light and they're getting the sensation that they deserve, but it's bad that the ones that don't get the same light shine upon them don't get the same type of attention they deserve. So these people, for the sake of this segment, let's recognize them as the unseen, unheard, and exploited frontliners. So what do I mean by unseen, unheard, and exploited frontliners? So unseen frontliners, in this instance, are technically workers who are subjected to very extreme and rigid working conditions, despite working in the pandemic with these conditions, right? So this would look like cleaners, waste management workers, security guards, etc. These extreme conditions would look like working under very unsanitary conditions, but at the same time, not getting enough affirmative action, not obtaining a sufficient pay, not being provided the necessary equipment to be able to carry out their work in a safer manner. Given reference to a post we posted on our Instagram at Solidariti, do follow us. These type of workers are often unheard and unseen. Their demands for masks or further incentives to ensure their safeness and increase repellabilities while doing their jobs are often swept under the rug. And to add unnecessary spice to the picture, we're all quite familiar with the particular budget 2021, which deems to be very inclusive, right? So, but that's the thing though, it's not inclusive. It's only inclusive to the people that we know of. What about these cleaners and management workers and security guards? There were no incentives in the budget to cater to them. So in this instance, inclusivity never looks so big. So the second issue I'll be talking to you about today would be the CPTPP, or in its longest form, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. So disclaimer, this is economy related. But I'll tackle this from a different angle because I am quite dumb on econs. I regretfully listened to Lil Pump during my econs class because it's an 8 a.m. class every Wednesday. And you know how Wednesday is just like a dry day and it's an 8 a.m. class some more. And then, I'm not saying that Lil Pump is a good person. He supports Trump, right? But Gucci Gang keeps me out. So, why not, right? But before that, basics on what this economic trade deal is. This economic trade deal is basically done in secrecy. It's done in a way where they preach to you that they'll create more jobs, etc. And it's done in order to liberalize the economy. So what does the liberalization of the economy mean? This means that foreign investors and multinational corporations get a hold of our economy, meaning to say the trade deal transcribes to MNCs or multinational corporations and foreign entities gaining a lot of power, and the government is obligated to cater to these individuals and their good needs. In short, they can sue the government in an international tribunal if the government were to ever put them in a negative spot. So meaning to say, this economy is not even ours if this deal were to happen, if this deal were to be ratified, especially given Biden taking over the office, and this deal likely to happen, then most likely our economy wouldn't belong to us; it will belong to the foreign corporations. So why does this really hurt, right? Number one is that policy space will be taken away, and priority will be going to the foreign entities, which means affirmative policies for people on the ground and local SMEs will be taken away. This will not only impact existing SMEs that are already struggling in status quo, especially despite the pandemic, right? But you'll also not be, you'll not get the chance to also improve the lives of the marginalized communities to begin with. And like this life of the marginalized communities will be further explained by Akmal in his Identity Erasure ETC, right? So practically, at the end of the day, if the CPTPP were to be ratified, it is practically losing our policy space, which means it will make us lose our solidarity, right? And our last issue of the day, my last issue that I'll be presenting to you, will be the media repression and freedom of speech, right? So freedom of speech lately has been quite a very gray area for us, especially given the emergency declaration, etc., right? But if it is already a gray area for us people, imagine the migrant workers that come, right? The migrant workers who are subjected to discrimination, etc. So basically, I'll heavily relate this to an issue that happened last year. I think y'all have heard about the migrant worker Kabir, who was interviewed by Al Jazeera and spoke out about the harsh reality of them despite the pandemic. Them getting very racist sentiments pointed out to them, especially regarding cleanliness and asking them to go back to their lands, etc. So he pointed out the lack of affirmative action, and he pointed out the racist sentiments and how they don't feel like they feel as if they're outsiders in like by the locals. However, Kabir gaining a channel and enough voice to put the problem on the map didn't come without a price. Kabir was later criticized by the locals and was searched by the officials, detained, and action was taken upon him. Al Jazeera was further investigated, right? So what does this indicate? Number one, this indicates that it sends a very scary message to existing migrant workers, but also indicates a repression on your freedom of speech. So what's the borderline of freedom of speech in Malaysia? Does speaking out, like what's considered as hate speech? Does speaking out on injustices considered as a voidment of freedom of speech, etc.? So these are all concerning gray areas, and these are all more very concerning gray areas for people like Kabir to even speak out on their injustices and their etc., right? So there were international scrutiny that happened though, towards the Malaysian government. But other than that, it's still a gray area. Even the Sedition Act as of status quo is very gray area. It's very gray. You can't you don't know the limit of what sedition was, a hate speech, etc. Especially given the pandemic and also given the declaration of emergency, right? So moving on to Dandelion.
Thank you, Rashid. As he said before, there are many issues that we should be concerned about, and one of them are land grabs. So land grabs, unfortunately, a very common occurrence here in Malaysia, particularly in area where the Orang Asli and the Borneans reside. If you don't know what land grabs are, they're essentially where lands are seized in an unlawful manner. Land grabs in Malaysia affect the Orang Asli in a way that it forces them to sell the land to certain parties. Yes, even the government does land grabs. So when land grabs happen, it forces them to lose the land that feeds them. Basically, they're left without a source of income because of this, since the land is usually utilized for farming, breeding, even small-time production for the natives and the Borneans. So this forces them to integrate with the ruthless modern trade system that often harms them. And they would sometimes resort to doing illegal trades with endangered animals. Imagine already struggling to live because of the lack of developments in those areas and still holding on to at least an honest crime-free life, but now you have to resort to it because your only source of income is yanked away, and now you're forced to dip your toes into crime to feed your family. That is a reality that is unfortunately quite common for a lot of people. One of the very famous cases is the Mulu land grab back in 2019 regarding a huge plot of land taken for oil palm plantations by Radiant Lagoon and the Sarawak state government. Yes, the state government of Sarawak backed the land grab, and it was a controversial issue for a hot minute that died down, and till this day, we have no known updates on the cases. Next up, we have death penalty and caning punishments. So as we know, the fight for death penalty is still continuing. The government has done multiple reviews, and up until recently, the judicial court have been looking into alternative punishments, which means that if the crime has a less severe punishment, they will pick that punishment instead of the death penalty, but it still allows death penalty. And no matter how bad the crime is, you cannot justify taking a life by hanging. And we'll talk about how this affects vulnerable communities later on, but let's move on to caning first. So caning is rarely talked about because it is integrated into the Asian culture system and it is permitted by the law. And it's allowed in four aspects, which is the judicial aspect, the Sharia aspect, domestic, and school. So unlike death penalty, people are pushing for caning to be integrated into more crimes. Currently, it's seen in crimes like drug trafficking, sex crimes, bribery, illegal immigration, and money laundering. In the Sharia aspect, caning is meant to bring shame rather than harm, which means that if they cane you, you're, God forbid, you're supposed to feel repentance and you're gonna, bertaubat and stuff. So in 2018, two women were punished to 6 strokes of the cane and a fine for having lesbian sex, and carried out by the Sharia High Court in Kuala Terengganu. Well, we were hit left and right from every activist group in the entire world, but of course we defended our actions because why the hell not? Other than that, in domestic aspect wise, parents are allowed to cane their children within limits in which they cannot cause physical and mental injuries. Only then it will be counted as an offense. So this is not really helpful because let's be real, there is no scale to measure mental injuries, being arbitrary and all. Plus, physical injuries are easy to cover up these days. So it gives parents so much leeway to get away from charges of abuse. And finally, in schools, they're still being allowed to carry out caning for children. And while the Ministry of Education itself has discouraged it, it is still being carried out in multiple different schools itself. In SKs and SJKTs, it's only common for boys to be punished with caning, but in SJKCs, it's very, very common for girls and boys to get caned at the same time. And in SJKCs, usually people will get caned up to 30 times a week for multiple mistakes like long nails, not bringing your books, not being able to answer your questions. So it's very much so very disheartening to see children getting beaten up. Now let's discuss why these punishments are not okay. So when we look at the demographic of these punishments that are carried out on, they usually target the underprivileged, the vulnerable, the poor. And we don't understand why they resort to these activities, right? But it's actually quite simple. Survival. When you are underprivileged and the system is not designed to help you, you still have to feed yourself and your family. Just because you give free education, that does not mean that the poor people have the tool to pull themselves out of the rut and somehow excel when other necessities are required for them to free themselves from poverty. It's like giving a child a swimsuit is not the same as giving a child a lesson in how to swim. Both have to be present in order for the child to get the best. So what I'm saying here is that these punishments are not effective and they do not help these communities at all. Do not punish these people for trying to live their lives as best as they can. Next up, we have disabilities and accessibilities. So as of the latest statistics, there are almost 500,000 disabled people living in Malaysia. But it is quite clear that Malaysia is not equipped with a lot of accessible commodities for them. Various public transportations are not equipped for the physically disabled. Communication is still a massive challenge for a lot of us because sign language isn't taught in schools. And disabilities that are usually involved are speech, sight, hearing, and physical. Speaking of schools and education, it is not really helpful that our education system is inherently ableist because it makes students who are neurodivergent difficult for them to obtain quality education. So actions like putting students on the spot, emphasis on attendance, being equivalent to intelligence, forced verbal presentations. It's bullying these kids up into the whole hustle culture, so they feel like, oh, working hard is equivalent to being successful, so to somehow integrate them better into the society. And I'm not saying that there are no tools to help the disabled. They're just not enough. It's only obvious in major cities. Smaller towns are not disabled friendly, period. And the justification is often like, oh, there isn't a lot of them here, so eh. So it is not hard to accommodate disabled. It's not. But we just don't think of the disabled when we talk about progress. And instead of forcing the disabled to adapt to hard situations, why not be an actual government and fix the problem from the root itself? The disabled have been forcing themselves to accept the status quo, while efforts to help them have been very, very minimal and very disappointing, to be completely honest with you. And my final presentation for today is East Identity Erasure. So, as we all know, Malaysia prides ourselves for being this multicultural melting pot. And it is true, we have different races, different religions, different faiths. However, it is quite easy to overlook the huge number of different cultures that the Borneans possess. So currently there are 29 known ethnicities in Sarawak and 42 in Sabah. But the majority of us would only know 4 to 5. And each ethnicity obviously has a different culture. But with the clumping of these identities, they tend to get lost and mixed up. And cultural eraser is the result of that. Other than that, there is not enough representation or exposure on these rich and varying cultures that they have. The clumping of Bumiputra identities have caused so much erasures and have harmed these identities, resulting in their erasure. This isn't just affecting the well-known ethnicities, they're obviously going to be affecting the lesser-known ones even more. And this is a problem because it transcends into politics, where the lack of representation prevents them from addressing these issues that are specific to that ethnicity that are plaguing their community. That leads to the decline of the community that is suffering from the said issue for a long period of time, since they have no one to speak up for them, and it causes their decline. Some ethnicities are known to integrate into other ethnicities because of these said issues, losing their culture in by itself. So you see, it's not the matter of putting these ethnicities on a screen and calling it a day. Representation that we often see on media, in Malaysian media, is always peninsula centric. And that's the obvious part of the bias that the media has towards Borneans, viewing them as less favorable, less marketable, and how the government media itself only uses them when necessary, doing ads, doing Hari Raya to show we're a multiracial country that is very tolerant, yay. It's always like that. And the lack of attention to these ethnicities are institutionalized. So the policies formed are, again, always peninsula-based, and they never serve the needs of these ethnics. And let's be real. Misconceptions and stereotypes about East identities are still widespread. And racial tensions are as high as ever. And again, the lack of representation is to be blamed as well. So, after we've stuffed you like turkey, and you basically know every single issue in the entire world, it's time for you to do something about it. So you must be wondering, what the hell can I do? I'm just a loser. I don't know what to do. Where do I get rid of all this crazy amount of anger that I feel because of these issues now? So when you're passionate about an issue, you obviously would see a lot of discussion and discourse about the issue on social media. You found out about the LGBT discourse on Instagram, on our post. You keep the discussion going. You learn more, you exchange points with people, you create an awareness, and you also help the algorithm. That's how algorithm works. The more people engage with it, the more people will see it. Big brain moment right there, ladies and gentlemen. Other than that, volunteer, go to your local old people's house. That's a great way to volunteer though, because hands-on aid is great. It helps you see the problem in a more clear way than you can ever see online. So other than that, when you want to understand an issue, obviously you're going to read. You're going to read stuff online. You're going to go to the websites that maybe help give out more information about the issue. Read up the news, find books. It's always helpful to be knowledgeable about the issues because facts don't lie. When you have facts, no one can argue with you. Facts are facts. And also, shameless plug, you can join MISI Solidariti. Everyone here is nice. I'm totally not being forced to say this. Yes. Back to Rashid.
All right. So now that you've heard about all these issues, and now that you've heard on like what you can do, right? So Danny and I have like briefly talked to you about all these issues that are not even like consisting of the quarter of the problem that we have at Solidariti School. And these issues are obscure at best. Just imagine how many issues that are left undug and that are left open, right? And you must be thinking like that's a lot of issues. However, that's the problem. You have so many problems. You try to care about a lot of them, but you try to contribute a thing or two because you feel like crap if you don't do so. And when it doesn't work out, you get irritated. You put yourself under pressure. You get mad at yourself. You hate yourself, right? But that's okay. I mean, it's not okay to hate yourself, but that's okay that you cannot solve everything. Don't get me wrong. So you've got the spirit, and you're also human. You have to understand that your headspace and your capacity isn't meant to cater to all of the problems in the world. And trying to take matters into your own hand and try to solve it overnight or single-handedly is very much impossible. Like, even if it's possible, it's quite challenging, right? And you have to also remember that these issues are not something that you can cater to overnight, and you cannot put you cannot put yourself under so much pressure for you to to the point in which where you have a very bad burnout or very bad fatigue. So there's no need to be hasty when it comes to resolving a lot of these issues, and it's okay to prioritize things in life. So compassion fatigue is a real thing. You get tired from caring about a lot of things. You get tired from showing so much empathy to every little issue in the world. And we're not trying to say, hey, pick a fight or drop or take an issue to care about. But we're saying that just like how you sometimes need a break from studying, or how you sometimes need a break from watching Grey's Anatomy for the 5th time because apparently it's very tormenting for your soul. That's how you need a break from caring about all these issues as well. P.S. Shameless plug, watch Grey's Anatomy. I've rewatched it for 5 times. I cried every episode. Yes. So yeah, take a break. And Danny will further tell you how to overcome and to avoid compassion fatigue, etc. P.S. Again, watch Grey's Anatomy. Back to you, Danny.
So basically, Rashid works for Shonda Rhimes now, and he thinks that Grey's Anatomy is the end of it all TV show. So, like he has said, you cannot afford to care about everything. You're not a fucking robot. You're only human. And eventually, I'm not even saying this just to piss you off, you will get compassion fatigue. It's coming. It's going to hit you. The world's going to seem super bleak. You're going to feel like you're Bella Swan and you moved into Forks and it's just a shitty ass grey town. That's how you're going to feel like. And it's important for you to know that you matter as well. Yes, you. Yes, you. Even though you hate yourself, you look in the mirror, you're ugly. No, doesn't matter. You matter. The world can seem like it's on fire, but you need to know when to take a step back and call it a day. So most of us here are on social media, right? And whether it's for you to watch reposted TikToks or thirst over men who will never notice you, you're bound to see the news. So it is a good thing for you to set a limit on the amount of news that you want to consume a day. So if you're sensitive, the lesser, the better. You're only helping yourself stay sane, and there's nothing wrong with that. No, you're not a wuss. You're trying to stay sane. Also, communicating with like-minded people about the issues that you're fretting about. It helps to know that you're not the only one who's concerned about it, and you're going to feel a lot better with a community. It's like very nice to know, like someone also thinks that avocados and chocolate and oranges don't go well together. They're demonic, and they will throw up with you at the sight of that stuff. It's possible. You have a community that's equally as crazy as you are. Also, indulge in entertainment. It's okay. Laugh at bad comedy for all we care. Humor is necessary for all of us to stay happy, and it still applies here, It really doesn't matter who. God, if you think Nigel Ng is funny with his basic ass Chinese fried rice jokes, I'm not judging. I used to think Lily Singh was peak comedy, so I cannot be the judge for comedy standards. So you know what? You do you. But no matter how heavy an issue is, you still need to laugh. And things will seem rough, like I said before, and it will punch you in the face. I'm not sure if you're into that, but okay. Pay attention to your emotional needs is what I'm going to say. If you are angry, go punch your pillow. Go WWE on that shit. If you're feeling sad, blast happy music. It's okay if that scrambled eggs cheer makes you happy. It's okay if you enjoy perfect. Just sing it out. Enjoy yourself. Give yourself the emotional break that you need. Get back into reading that terribly written fiction on Wattpad again. It's okay. Watch that anime that you have been wanting to do on your to-do list. Do it. This is a message from God. Do it. And also, having friends while being in the activism realm is super important. And when I talk about friends, I'm talking about those outside of the activism realm as well, to help cheer you up. It does not have to be super serious all the time. Sometimes you just need random talks about random things that don't even make sense. Have fun with them. It's okay to debate about which girl would Levi Ackerman date in real life, even though he's not real, and will probably still, again, will never notice you. And also, finally, it's important to note that when you are an activist, you will have an ungodly amount of expectations towards the issue that you're tackling. I'm going to dismantle capitalism. No, you're not going to do that in 3 days. Calm down. When fighting for something that takes time, you have to set a realistic expectation. You have to look at the big picture, you have to look at the timeline, and you have to plan out your plan properly. You have to see what outcome can I achieve in this particular timeline. Save yourself from that crippling disappointment. Stop putting yourself in positions that will compromise your happiness. Okay, I'm done basically, guys. So we literally have stuffed you like a turkey for Thanksgiving, and these issues are a lot. I understand that, but I hope that we've reassured you enough that when you're having a burnout, you're not being abnormal. It's okay to be a homosexual. Homo sapien. I'm so sorry. So, do you guys have any questions? I'm gonna check the chat. All right. So thank you guys so much. Passing on to Rashid now.
All right, I have nothing to say. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you all finally have the motivation to start reading out on issues and start taking a break. Also watch Grey's Anatomy. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Wei Shane, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, let's start. Okay. Hi, my name is Ashley.
And my name is Shane. So today we will be introducing MISI Solidarity to all of you.
You've seen what our members have presented so far, so now it's time for you to get to know us. So what is MISI Solidarity? If you haven't seen our Instagram or our Twitter bio, MISI Solidarity is a youth-led collective aspiring to empower society through the value of direct action in Malaysian activism. This sounds like so big and so hebat and things like that, right? But like this organization was founded by 4 university students in over their head with nothing to their name. And today we are 44, I think 45 maybe, members strong and counting. MISI Solidarity and its members operate on essential guiding principles, which brings us to our next slide. Jane?
Okay, so MISI Solidarity is guided by 3 principles, which you can read about it in our primer, but to just explain it briefly, our first guiding principle is youth power. That means in MISI Solidarity, we believe that now more than ever, youth need a place to channel their energy for change. Because, yeah, it sounds really cheesy and cliche to say this, but the future really belongs to you and I. It belongs to us. And if we don't make or push for change, who will? A lot of times when NGOs recruit youth, they tend to lead with that, oh, you follow us or do what you're told concept. But in MISI Solidarity, we ask, what do you think? And we let our own members lead their own projects. The next guiding principle is direct action, which sounds exactly like what it means. It's action that is direct. A lot of NGOs depend on MPs and municipal councils. And it's not to say they're not doing a great job. Of course, they're doing a great job. They are. But a lot of times we feel that resources are poured into that. And in MISI Solidarity, our principle is that we do the work and we don't ask for help or permission from authorities. We get it done by ourselves. It being more than just listening to the voices of the unheard, it's giving them the right tools to further help themselves in the future. This is what we call actions. Um, okay. Lastly, as you've already learned, our last guiding principle is intersectionality, where we acknowledge and recognize that oppressions are interlocked, that no issues exist in a vacuum. Ashley? Oh, the slides are stuck. Oh no, so sorry. So sorry for technical difficulties right now.
Yeah,
We'll be right
apologies,
back.
sorry.
Yes, we'll be right back very quickly.
Is it okay now, Shane?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So Ashley, would you like to continue?
Yeah, okay. With that all being said, here's a look at our past events, which we feel encapsulate all these principles. One of our very first events when MS was still a tiny baby was Valentine's for All. It was a safe space for the community to come together and learn how to fight for our right to love. We also did a collaborative zine together, inspired by the Champaka Collective, as well as learned about our police power and our rights via a presentation by Swaram. There was also a panel consisting of Punky Tech from Sexuality Merdeka and Tilaga Suratere from Justice for Sisters. Next, we have the Minority Matters live stream, which is spearheaded by 3 members of MS, one of which lives in Malacca. This goes to show you can join MS from anywhere in the world and make an impact. Like me personally, I'm doing online uni, but I don't know when I'll be able to go to my actual unis. But either way, I think I'll still be in MS. And with the 3 panelists that we invited, we sparked a debate and discussion on day-to-day discriminations that Malaysian Indians face. Sorry. Another event we had recently is our intersectionality workshop, which again, all of you have already experienced thanks to Brian and Victor. During Swaram School of Activism, we gave a seminar breaking down the topic of intersectionality and why it's so crucial in our activism. And now we hope you know why too.
Now, you might be wondering, so how does Mrs. Solidarity come up with future events? Well, Mrs. Solidarity consists of 5 executives, which are the chairman, executive officer, treasurer, secretary, and communication officer. But everyone works on equal footing in 2 divisions, which is the outreach and social media. Our outreach team handles more of the groundwork and collaborative efforts, while the social media team works on our online presence and pushing to further educate the public. Besides that, we also have something called working groups, which every member, regardless of division, can join. Now, what are working groups? Every few months, the executive officer will ask for pitch ideas from our members. Once the executive officer receives all pitch ideas, they will then inform the members of these new pitches and new working groups are made. Members can then decide whether they want to join and how many do they want to join. And it's important to note that in our in how Mrs. Solidarity works is that in working groups, there are no concrete ways on how that working group should function. There are no higher ups telling you, hey, you should do this and you must do this and that. Instead, it's really all dependent on what you and your team wants to do. Like what's your view and what's your initiative with that project. So basically, it's really go wild with it. Whatever you want to do. You don't want to have a leader, don't have a leader, because really there's no right or wrong way to it. Working groups aren't about having things planned from A to Z or about ensuring everything is perfect. It's more about us learning and growing together because, hey, we're all still fairly new to this and that's okay.
With that all being said, here is a sneak peek at some of our working groups that you may or may not know about yet. So Project HEAT works on pushing for the passing of the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission or the IPCMC bill, and they also advocate for against police brutality alongside their collaboration with Swaram. Secondly, we have Project Industry, which is us, which works on activism workshops like the one you're attending right now. Next, we have Project Serotonin, which advocates for reform in Malaysia's mental health sector and focuses on bringing accessibility to therapy and other services. We have also Project Onion, which works on creating digital booklets for the public in order to cultivate empathy in people through stories and visuals. By the way, you should follow Missy Bawang as well. Yeah.
Okay, next we have Project Climate, which works on educating the public on environmental issues that surround Malaysia as well as the world. And we also have Project Quilt, which works on pushing for equity in education and aims to collaborate with other with Myers or Teach for Malaysia in order to make a change. And we also have Project Snowden, which aims to educate the masses about data privacy, privacy rights, and pushing for better privacy laws in Malaysia. And lastly, we have our newest project called Project Snippet, which aims to bring MISI Solidarity and its work onto a new platform. So follow us to figure out what platform that is. Very exciting news, you know? Okay, so personally, joining MISI Solidarity was my very big step into activism. It's quite a funny story how I joined, but you have to join MISI Solidarity in order to know that story. So, you know, got me? Okay. But yeah, when I first got interviewed, I really wasn't sure about my own capabilities, my own knowledge too. And I feel like a lot of us probably share the same thing. We aren't sure what we can do. Like, I don't know much things. Even now, I'm still unsure about things. But honestly, I'm so grateful to the people who interviewed me and pushed me to join. Because although, again, I can't say, oh, I'm super knowledgeable in activism, oh, I'm super great and all that. I can say there is a reason why I'm in activism, and there is a reason why I want to keep going, keep learning, and keep growing. And I'm very grateful for Mrs. Solidarity. Yeah, for that.
My personal story in joining MS is not nearly as hilarious as Shane's. Sorry, Shane. But genuinely, you don't need a huge story to want to join MS. Just like wanting to join MS because you heard about it in a workshop, you know. Please join. Okay. I personally just came across the organization from one of my friends and decided to apply. And in it, I was able to meet new people like Shane and also all the lovely people that have presented before me as well and do good work while we were in lockdown and still are in lockdown. Now, which brings us to why should you join us? The simple answer is why not? You're in our activism workshop for a reason, and that reason is you have the fire in you.
Whether it's to fight the good fight,
to make and see a change in our country,
or to learn about activism,
or to do something good. Okay, in Mr. Solidarity, it's not about how much you can contribute or how far you are willing to go. It's about whether you are willing to take the first step into fighting the good fight, whether you will be brave with us.
See, Mrs. Solidarity stands for bravery. And when you are ready to be brave, then we are here to say that your bravery won't go unnoticed, that you won't need to be brave alone. Because again, the activism scene is so scary and can be so daunting, right? How can you fight that alone? It's okay that you can't fight that alone because, hey, we're here. You and I, Mrs. Solidarity, will be brave together, okay? And if you don't trust us, you should trust our members who have said that Mrs. Solidarity gave me a space to constantly learn and grow from everyone in the team. Some have even said that it's an eye-opening and inspiring experience.
Mrs. Solidarity has people in Mrs. Solidarity have also said that we have great company, a lot of passion to do right and drive to do right and uplift. Like you can read from the slide. I'm so sorry. And you in Mrs. Solidarity, you also get the opportunity to fight for different causes under intersectional youth group.
With that all being said, we have come to the end of our promotional segment for Mrs. Solidarity, as well as the end of Amateur Activism. Clap hand, clap hand, clap hand. Very nice, very nice. Thank you so much for listening. And if any of this piques your interest, you can either scan the QR link on the slide or head over to our cardco on Instagram at @msolidarity. Oh, and before you leave, it would be really great if you could please fill up our feedback form inside the YouTube comment section. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're just really appreciative about it. And we hope we've charged your activism battery. And if you want to continuously charge your activism battery, please stay tuned for our forum later at 8:30. And yes, we are all holding a battery, if you guys can see. Thank you again for joining us.
Like this.
Everyone, charge your activism battery. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, okay. Okay, bagus, bagus.
Remember to join our forum later at 8:30 p.m. where we have 3 amazing activists, okay? Thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, clap hands. Good job, good job. So proud of everyone for joining and all of us. Woo! Yes, I did. Wait. Remember to fill our feedback form. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys. Love
Thank
you.
Thank you so much.
Mwah.
Bye.
That was so.
Yeah. Yes.
Wait, are you done streaming? Please tell me you're done streaming. Oh my
Sarah, you
fucking
couldn't see my
god.
you couldn't see my camera. I opened it.
Girl.
You can't see you, bro.
Damn it.
Good job, guys.
Good job, guys.
Giving everyone a high five.
You all have worked so hard for this. Good job, guys.
Oh.
Come on. This was a lot. It was supposed to be November, then December, and then the end of January, for God's sake. So freaking.
We forgot to ask questions.
Oh, just start the audience. No need lah.
I mean, no one asked the question.
No, actually, no one was asking questions. Shane and
Yeah.
Ashley, they were just like saying yes, yay.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, for like, oh.
Also, Sarah, I think you need to delete that 6-minute video we have on our channel. It was just you like yelling and like trying to figure out how the stream works. It's still there, the 6-minute video. And it has like
Oh my god.
6 views.
And when we were taking the batteries photo, Sarah was like, fuck Victor. Many times.
My camera was opened. I took out this. You guys couldn't see this?
Yeah, only towards the end.
Okay,
Only
but like,
after
why is
the
it blurred
photo,
as
is it?
much? Why is it blurred so much though? It looks like you're just carrying a sensor bar.
So she got only after the photo was taken, I appeared, is it?
No, it's 10 years into MS blooper moments. Yep. I don't even know why we didn't put a swipe up link for our stories.
I don't think we have swipe up yet. You need like a certain number of followers, then only we can get swipe.
Oh, seriously?
Thousand, right?
Rashid, do you want to play a game? I need entertainment.
I cannot find back the live stream. I cannot find back the live stream like right now. Yeah. Still see it. Oh, wait. Okay, yeah, it's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah. I think it's,
No, you don't need to. But it's there.
Also, why is Rashid's roast this time was getting worse and worse? Like more. The last rehearsal, you didn't come for Dandelion like that, okay?
I needed like stuff for the like attention.
Get it?
yeah, can see.
Okay.
I think cannot see already the 6-minute stream.
So battery.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Let me
Yes.
my battery.
Yes.
Also, I think we got more subscribers from this event. Because like just now it was like
More.
30 something. Now it's 50 something already.
We gained. That's nice.
Bro, nice.
Whose audio is that? It's
I was muted the whole time.
I think it's Shana. Shana, this one. Oh my god, Shana spoke so well. I'm so proud.
Yeah.
you got.
Dude, my friends are like, she sounds like a professional newsreader.
Yeah.
Also, your slides were very, very nice. Super, super easy to read. Like,
Pravin and Sharon and Sarah, yeah, help.
very, very.
They all
Everyone
know.
did
Thank you.
very serious, guys.
I mean, like, never mind the fact. Oh my god, great job. I mean, we had bumps today, but it was great.
My god, for at least like 3 to 4 months worth of effort, like finally done.
Wow. Yeah, sending project industry to the Kubo today.
Wait, can y'all like? There's a poll in MISI Solidarity's story, and I'm the only one that answered so far. But can y'all go do it?
Okay.
What's
I have
that?
to my private admin. I mean, sure.
You're
I
gonna
love how-
hold up our battery
I love
again.
how the thumbnail of the second one is just Brian with thumbs up. Like,
Wait, y'all
Oh,
need
you
to promote my video.
You can't see my camera?
no,
Yeah, it's delayed by a couple seconds, I think.
We can see now.
All right.
We can see now. It's okay, Sarah.
where's the poll? Let me see.
I can't see the poll though, Brian. Which one are you talking about?
Let's see. Oh yeah, join me Solidarity. Yes, yeah. Is that the poll? Okay, hold on.
Where's the poll? Oh. Who the hell would know? Messy.
Battery,
That's good as
yes,
well.
battery,
Everyone.
Yes.
so cute.
I feel like an influencer, like promoting. Yes, use my code. You always do this.
All right, guys. Money.
Beach.
I hope they don't notice my outfit change. It was just
It's outfit.
Oh my god, yeah.
So cute.
It's timeless. Shut up. Victor looks like someone caught him red-handed stealing a bet. Yes, love how they censored Brian's battery.